Hi, I'm Matt, and we're back with Just in Time, the rapid fire roundup of current events, supply chain, and beyond. Today, we have a special guest, CEO and co founder of Huron Skincare, Matt Mullinex. How are you, Matt?
Doing well, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And also, we have Dan and Will from Anvil's global operations team. How you doing, Dan?
Doing great.
And you, Will?
What's poppin', Matt?
Not much. Let's get right to it. Apparently, Frito-Lay is no longer letting supply chain matters stifle their SKU count, and they're actually adding back more in spite of ongoing current issues. So question, is there a right way to balance customer demand for SKUs against the supply chain constraints? I'll start with you, Dan.
Yeah, I do think there is a way. I think one thing that we to put in perspective is just how massive of a company Frito-Lay is, where they have the power to actually look at demand and their whole supply chain, because they're definitely more vertically integrated as well. So they have the ability to use analytics. They have distribution centers across, I think they said they had 12 different nodes. They have their own fleet of trucks. So they come into the camp where they're flexible and nimble. I don't know if that's a repeatable method for a lot of companies where, hey, if they want to launch a new SKU, it takes time or testing, where they already have proven commodities that are out on the market. I do want to get a sense from, I guess, from your side, Matt, with your just new launch of the bar soap. How did you look into launching that? Were there any trends you saw, customer feedback? What led to that latest round of product, and how long did it take to go from concept to completion there?
Yeah, a bunch of good questions to unpack there. I think one thing worth mentioning that at the earlier stages, these are lengthy processes from a product development standpoint. When we think about ideation, from tapping into our community of customers and thinking about what products would they expect from Huron, and kind of marrying that with our intuition around what we feel like we could add in terms of a true point of difference to our assortment. So that's kind of like the art and the science marriage we think about in the product development cycle. But around the analytics piece and Dan kind of tapping into customer insights, one of the things we learned pretty early on in our journey was that there's a lot of consumers who are just bar soap fans. So for us, it was super interesting in the fact that, we launched body wash as a part of our initial assortment, but quickly collected feedback that, folks across the pricing spectrum, from entry price points, even more premium pricing, that there's just an affinity towards bar soap. So this is always something that we've had kind of in the pipeline. And it just so happened that we brought it to market, 2 weeks ago or so. But it's definitely something we've been working on for quite some time. So it's not like we woke up one morning 3 weeks ago and said, we should make bar soap, and quickly spun it up. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes.
And Matt, maybe kind of tagging on to that, then question wise, when you think about SKUs, and when you think about when's the right decision to have 1 versus 3 in different sense, and when you make the decision, say, okay, this is ultimately what we're going to launch with, what kind of goes into it with there to where you think, all right, I have the right SKU profile assortment set up?
Yeah, I think we still have a decent runway ahead of us in terms of products that we're looking to launch to ultimately form kind of our core infrastructural basis in terms of product assortment. And then I think from there, we're constantly looking at sell-through rates and how quickly we're moving inventory to determine, as we evolve and start to branch off into certain areas or explore other areas, are there any product laggards that we could say, hey, we tried this and for whatever reason, maybe it didn't work. So we're constantly looking at not only kind of growing the assortment, but also internally to say, are there any SKUs that maybe are underperforming to our standards and that maybe we could reformat, reshape, repackage, remarket, quite frankly, to think about how those products could contribute to the overall base assortment. But it's pretty tactical and pretty calculated. And I feel like for a brand like ours that kind of aspires to take over the bathroom, there are certainly some holes currently in our SKU set that we will look to address in the coming months.
Yeah, and I think that's important for people to think about. And, when you compare that to Frito-Lay, Dan hit the nail on the head that they get so much real-time data right away from their different integrations, whether it be store point sales, distribution, et cetera. I mean, they can pivot and they know when. And I think the other nice thing is that they have pretty consistent chassis about how they deliver their different SKUs. And so you're not looking at, you're, for comparison's sake, Matt's talking about a bar soap, but then you have a bottle that may be doing a shampoo, but then you're talking about, an eye stick. Those are three totally different things versus, the bags, are typically the same sizes. And there are some things that they can do outside of the print and whatnot, but not totally different.
Yeah. And I think just to even piggyback on that, I mean, I think when we think about SKU assortment and SKU growth, we kind of think about it along the lines of product breadth, but also product depth. So to that point being kind of product depth, which is, okay, we have a formula that everyone seems to know and love in our body wash. Can we make it in various sizes? So we made it in a travel size, we made it in a jumbo pack. So you give the optics of having a much larger SKU assortment, but you're kind of relying on some of those early breadwinners to say, like, how can we get this in different shapes, forms, sizes, et cetera, to kind of further cater to the consumer need.
I guess, Matt, I guess comparing it back to the Frito-Lay where they can pick and choose, and obviously they don't really need to run into MOQ constraints when they need to pivot since everything's mostly done in-house. When you start analyzing your different bar soaps or your existing SKUs of what scents are doing better, what are you looking at in like the flexibility in pushing some levers up, some down? How much runway are you giving consumers to make those decisions before you go ahead and change a little bit on the back end side for your offerings?
Yeah, are you kind of referring to kind of like how we think about kind of a launch and number like MOQs and things like that?
Yeah, I guess in launch, like how much time are you giving it, like the market to suss this out to see if this scent's working, or
Yep.
then changing and pivoting from there, or you have to go back into more formula development, or maybe spur up another new scent. I guess what do you think about and look for in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, in comparison to Frito-Lay, I mean, I think something that's obviously different is just like stage of business. So that they're tapping into a massive network of existing customers, where we're tapping into a much smaller network of existing customers, but still acquiring eyeballs at the same time. So I think that runway to kind of assess whether or not this foots the bill for our metrics, internal metrics of success, might look a little bit different. It's probably a little bit longer. But what I think we create the opportunity for ourselves to do is think about bundling and kitting and kind of grouping some of these products into pre-made bundles, et cetera, to kind of further drive growth within the product. So really it's still more about brand exposure at this point and how we can kind of cater to the various needs of our consumers.
All right, moving along. Last week, Forbes published a write-up suggesting that the pandemic just accelerated challenges and opportunities that were already present in supply chain. Gentlemen, from your own experience, can you think of examples where you've seen this, or even examples that might suggest the opposite? I'll start with you, Will.
Yeah, I think something that has been exacerbated by the pandemic is brands' reliance on freight forwarders and how good your freight forwarder is or is not, and the deficiencies that freight forwarders have today and how they actually go about their business. I think when brands today, they want to ship something, they reach out to their freight forwarder, and that choke point becomes apparent based on who your contact is. You really do not know when you're going to get a schedule, when you're going to get a booking, unless that person tells you what is happening. And so that visibility has really been exacerbated, because now what we're seeing is freight forwarders are overloaded. They're not getting time, and that knowing when you're going to get a sailing, knowing when you're going to get on a flight is really being exacerbated by the lack of people to work and how good or how not good your freight forwarder is. And so I think that is breaking the system on that, to where innovation's obviously needed, but how the process works, they need more people, et cetera. So I think that's one big thing that I'm seeing today, is how reliant people are on their freight forwarders and how antiquated the system is.
Yeah, I mean, this definitely has amplified everything. I think one area, just from previous experience, is this whole area this is related to forwarders, but more on both like the fulfillment side and also your contract manufacturers is there's always this concept around like delivery windows for when goods are supposed to arrive by, like you set an appointment and they were like rigid in nature. So they can do their planning. Now it's like really enforced, which is kind of unfair in a sense because you don't have control over when those goods are going to be delivered. You're just in the process, but also like how rigid a lot of these companies are in scheduling and their processes. Like there is no flexibility, and just everything that's happening in the transit side is just out of the control for brands right now. And I think a lot of the system for like contract manufacturers and fulfillment centers on their receiving side and planning side is broken, and they need to be more flexible. Understandable, you don't want hundreds of pallets lining up, but they need to give the brand flexibility here, because it's not, as long as they're alerting you and you're in communication throughout and that's there, you can't abandon your customers at a time of need, or they'll just look to leave, because there's definitely manufacturers out there. There's definitely a lot of fulfillment centers out there that are forming up, a lot of micro fulfillment centers. So keeping in good relationships with those CMs fulfillment centers is super important. I guess I wonder for you, Matt, just, you don't need to name drop any of your partners here, but have you seen any of that? I know you're a relatively young company. A lot of the growth was during COVID, but anything that's been amplified or exacerbated in that time period?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of even take a step back a little bit, two things. One, I think the past 15 to 18 months has really illuminated the fact that the supply chain is indeed a chain, right? Like we are reliant and dependent upon a number of different constituents, from packaging providers to freight forwarders to contract manufacturers to fulfillment houses. And we're relying on the strength of those partnerships to help us all kind of get through what is a pretty difficult period of time. Secondly, to kind of address your point, at the end of the day, these parties are service providers, right? Like they are providing a service of making packaging, transporting packaging, filling product, et cetera. And I think from the brand's perspective, again, difficult times across the board, but we're really kind of looking and assessing and stress testing to some extent, how are we treated in these times as a brand? Are people willing to hold things a little bit longer, try and deliver things a little bit quicker, hold themselves to certain costing, et cetera, that I view as kind of a long-term investment in the brand partnership. And I think when we kind of come out on the other side of this pandemic and when the kind of the supply chain issues subside a bit, I think we'll certainly be kind of reevaluating our universe of partners to say, in times of need, where were we really well supported and maybe under supported by a few. And if that is the case, then maybe we would look to make a switch.
All right. With that, I'd like to thank you, Matt, for joining us this week. Matt, where can people go to learn more about Huron?
The easiest place is probably our website, which is just usehuron.com. And we're at usehuron on all the socials. So hopefully we can make you laugh a little bit and then learn a little bit more on site.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. I'd also like to thank Dan and Will again for joining us, and you, the audience, for watching. Be sure to share this with your colleagues if you liked what you saw. And if you want to learn more about Anvil, go to anvil.com, ANVYL.com. Thanks a lot, everyone.